Welcome to the channel. Today I bring you an unbelievable and exciting story that will captivate you from start to finish. Let's hear the stunning account of Rowan Lockhart, a mother who faced death in a shocking near-death experience and came back with a revelation about the future that could change everything we know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any news, and if you like this type of content, leave a like and share with your friends. Now, get ready for an unforgettable journey. Hello, my name is Rowan Lockhart. I never imagined I would be here telling this story, but I believe it is important to share what happened to me. I am not a famous writer, nor have I founded any spiritual group. I'm just an ordinary single mom from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, who had an extraordinary experience. It all started in 1998, when I was 35 years old. At that time, I was struggling to raise my son Ethan, who was 9 years old. I had been divorced for 5 years and life was not easy at all. I worked 2 different jobs just to pay the bills and put food on the table. It wasn't easy balancing work with the responsibilities of being a mother, especially being alone. Ethan has always been my strength. Even though he was so young, he had a maturity that surprised me. I think, like me, he had to learn to adapt to our circumstances. He was curious, always asking questions about everything. Seeing his smile every day reminded me that I couldn't give up, no matter how hard things got. That summer of 1998, my friend Harper, who was also a single mother, suggested we go on a rafting trip. She said it would be fun, a chance to escape the routine for a bit. At first I was hesitant. After all, we barely had money for basic needs, let alone a trip. But Harper insisted, saying we could do something cheap by taking the boys and renting the equipment. I ended up agreeing. After all, it had been so long since I had done something just for fun. And Ethan was so excited when I told him about the idea that I didn't have the courage to back out. Little did we know that this seemingly simple decision would change our lives forever. I've never been a particularly religious or spiritual person. Sure, I believed in God in general, but I wasn't the kind of person who went to church every Sunday or prayed regularly. My faith was something more personal, something I kept to myself. If someone had told me back then that I would have a near-death experience, that I would meet God and see paradise, I probably would have laughed. These things happened in movies or to other people, not to ordinary single mothers like me. But life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? So here I am, ready to share my story. It's not a story I expected to tell, but it's one I feel I need to share. It's a story about life and death, about love and sacrifice, about faith in the future of humanity. It's a story that completely changed the way I see the world and my place in it. The day of our rafting trip dawned perfect. The sky was an intense blue without a cloud in sight. The sun was shining brightly, promising a hot Colorado summer day. I woke up early, excited and a little nervous. I hadn't done anything like an adventure in years. Ethan was electric. He woke up before me, already with his backpack ready and dressed in his bathing suit. His enthusiasm was contagious, and it made me momentarily forget all the worries that normally occupied my mind. Harper arrived around 8 a.m. with her son Jake, who was the same age as Ethan. The boys immediately began chatting about the adventure that awaited them, making plans about who would row and who would get in front of the boat. We took the road towards the river. The car ride was full of laughter and music. I felt light, lighter than I had felt in years. For a moment, I forgot I was an overworked single mom. In that car, I was just Rowan, a woman about to have an adventure with her son and friends. We arrived at the boarding point around 10 a.m. The river glistened in the sun, the clear water reflecting the blue sky. The sound of the current was both exciting and a little scary. We met the guide who would help us with the equipment and give us safety instructions. As we put on our life jackets and listened to the guide's instructions, I felt a slight tightness in my chest. What if something went wrong? What if Ethan got hurt? But I looked at my son's excited face and forced those thoughts away. Everything would be okay, I told myself. Finally, it was time to get into the boats. Harper and Jake stayed in one, while Ethan and I stayed in the other. The guide helped us get in and showed us how to hold the oars correctly. Ethan was at the front, his eyes wide with excitement as he looked at the rapidly flowing water. The first moments in the water were magical. The boat glided smoothly, and the cool water splashed us from time to time, bringing relief from the heat of the sun. Ethan laughed with every little jump the boat made, and I found myself laughing along with him. For a while, everything seemed perfect. We rowed in sync, following the guide's instructions. Harper and Jake were a little ahead of us, and we could hear their laughter echoing over the sound of the water. The scenery around us was breathtaking. The mountains rose majestically on both sides of the river, and we occasionally saw birds flying high in the sky. But then, things started to change. The current became stronger, and the guide warned us that we were approaching an area with rapids. My heart started to beat faster, a mix of adrenaline and fear. I gripped the paddle tighter and looked at Ethan, making sure he was safe. It was at that moment that everything went wrong. Our boat hit a submerged rock that we hadn't seen. The impact was sudden and violent. I felt my body being thrown out of the boat before I even understood what was happening. The last thing I saw before falling into the water was Ethan's horrified face, his hands reaching toward me, unable to reach me. The icy water enveloped me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The shock of the impact and the temperature left me momentarily paralyzed. My body spun out of control in the current, and I struggled to understand what was up and what was down. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in. I began to struggle, desperately trying to reach the surface. My lungs burned, begging for air. Every second felt like an eternity as I fought the relentless force of the water. For a brief moment, I managed to emerge. I swallowed a large amount of air before being pulled back down. I heard distant screams. Were they Ethan's? From Harper? I couldn't distinguish. The current dragged me downstream, away from the place where we had fallen. I tried to remember the safety training the guide had given us. If you fall into the water, keep your feet forward, he had said. But that was easier said than done. My body kept spinning, and I couldn't orient myself. Panic started to take over me. I thought of Ethan alone in the boat. What if he had fallen too? The thought of my son facing the same terror as me was unbearable. I had to survive. I had to get back to him. Once again, I managed to reach the surface. This time, I saw Harper's boat not far away. I heard screams, saw arms reaching towards me. I tried to swim. I tried to move toward them, but the current was too strong. I was dragged down again. Exhaustion was starting to take over. My movements became slower, less coordinated. The burning in my lungs was unbearable. My mind started to feel foggy. At that moment, a terrible thought occurred to me. I could die there. The reality of the situation hit me full force. I could die in that river, leaving Ethan alone in the world. Guilt and fear consumed me. How could I be so irresponsible? How could I put my son in danger? My strength was quickly running out. Every move was a fight. The water seemed to grow heavier, pulling me down with an irresistible force. My vision began to darken at the edges. In a last desperate effort, I tried to swim up, but my body no longer responded to my commands. I felt a strange calm come over me. The fear began to fade, replaced by resigned acceptance. My last conscious thoughts were of Ethan. Your smile, your laugh, the warmth of your hugs. I felt a deep pain at the thought that I would never see him grow up again. I would never hear your voice again. I would never hold your hand again. And then, just when I thought it was all over, something extraordinary happened. A soft light began to envelop me, pushing away the darkness that threatened to consume me. The panic and fear were completely gone, replaced by a peace I had never experienced before. It was at this moment, suspended between life and death, that my true journey began. As the light enveloped me, I felt my body become weightless, as if I were floating. The drowning sensation completely disappeared, replaced by a deep, comforting peace. It was as if I had been embraced by something greater than I could comprehend. Then, I saw him. A luminous, radiant, and majestic figure. I can't describe exactly what he looked like because it was more of a sensation than a vision. But I knew with a certainty I had never felt before that I was in the presence of God. There was no fear. There was no shock or surprise. It was as if I was meeting someone I had always known but had forgotten. The love that emanated from him was overwhelming. I felt completely accepted, completely understood. God did not speak with words. Instead, his voice seemed to resonate within me, as if every cell of my being could hear him. "You did what you could, Rowan," he told me. "I see your sacrifice, the love you have for your son. You don't need to worry. I will never abandon you." These words touched the core of my soul. All the doubts I carried, all the guilt for not being a perfect mother, for not being able to give Ethan everything I wanted, all of that dissolved. For the first time, I truly understood that my love was enough. God showed me my life, not as a series of events, but as an intricate tapestry where every moment, every choice, every struggle wove together to form a pattern bigger and more beautiful than I could ever imagine. I saw how my struggles had made me stronger, how my love for Ethan had made me a better person. At that moment, I understood that I was not alone. Never been. Even in the most difficult moments when I felt completely helpless, God was with me, guiding me, strengthening me. God's presence was so comforting that for a moment I completely forgot about the world I had left behind. All the pain, all the struggle, all the fear, it all seemed so distant and insignificant now. But then, gently, God reminded me of Ethan, not with words, but with a feeling of love so intense it almost hurt. I saw my son through God's eyes, perfect, loved, precious beyond measure, and I understood that my journey on earth was not yet complete. God asked me a question that echoed throughout my being. "Do you want to stay or go back to earth?" The choice was mine, and I knew that whatever I decided would be accepted with love. For a moment, I was tempted to stay. The peace I felt was indescribable. There was no pain, there was no fear, there was no struggle, just perfect love and total acceptance. But then I thought about Ethan, on his scared face when he saw me fall from the boat, in the life we still had ahead of us. With a heart full of gratitude and love, I looked to God and said, "I need to go back. My son needs me." They were not spoken words, but an intention from the heart. And I knew God understood. God showed no disappointment or sadness with my choice. Instead, I felt his love and approval enveloping me even more intensely. He showed me that my decision to return was, in itself, an act of love, both for Ethan and for him. Before I could return, God took me to a place I can only describe as paradise. It was a garden of indescribable beauty, more magnificent than anything I had ever seen or imagined on earth. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had ever experienced. The flowers seemed to emit their own light, each petal glowing with an ethereal softness. The air was filled with a sweet, comforting scent, a mix of fragrances that I couldn't identify but that made me feel at home. As we walked through the garden, I saw creatures that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Snow-white rabbits hopped among the flowers, their fur glowing with a soft light. Squirrels ran across the tree branches, their eyes filled with pure joy that was contagious. The trees were majestic, their leaves rustling in a breeze that I couldn't feel but somehow knew was there. Each leaf seemed to contain a universe of colors, subtly changing as I looked. There was a stream meandering through the garden, its water clearer than crystal. As I got closer, I could see little fish swimming around, their scales sparkling with colors I didn't even know existed. Most surprising of all was the feeling of absolute peace that permeated every inch of that place. There was no fear, there was no worry, there was no pain. Every breath I took seemed to fill me with indescribable joy. As we walked, God showed me things I can barely put into words. I saw the interconnectedness of all things, how every action, every thought, every moment of love reverberates through the universe in ways we cannot understand on earth. I saw beauty in every soul, even those we consider lost or evil on earth. I understood that each person is loved unconditionally, that each life has a purpose, even if we cannot always see what it is. In that paradisiacal garden, time seemed to not exist. It could have been a moment or an eternity. I couldn't tell. Every moment was so full of wonder and discovery that I almost forgot I had chosen to return. It was then that a luminous figure appeared next to me. It was not God, but another being of light, equally serene and loving. His presence radiated a deep calm, and I knew instantly that he had something important to tell me. The being of light spoke, not in words but directly to my soul. On September 11, 2024, a cycle of conflict will end on Earth. That day will mark the beginning of a global spiritual awakening. A new era of peace and understanding will begin, but humanity must be prepared. These words, or rather this revelation, were recorded in my mind with crystal clarity. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this message was not just for me, but for all of humanity. As I absorbed the meaning of this revelation, I felt a subtle shift. The light of paradise began to dim, and I felt my being gently pulled back. It was time to return. With one last look at the heavenly garden, at God and at the being of light, I said goodbye. The peace of paradise began to dissipate, replaced by the feeling of heaviness in my physical body. I was returning to Earth, to Ethan, to my life. But now, with a new purpose and a new understanding. The transition back into my body was abrupt and disorienting. One moment I was in paradise, enveloped in light and love, and the next I was back in the freezing river, struggling to breathe. The first sensation was pain. My lungs burned, begging for air. The cold of the water enveloped me again, a shock after the welcoming warmth of paradise. For a moment I was confused. Had it all been just a dream as I drowned? But then, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I began to swim. My arms and legs moved almost of their own accord, propelling me towards the surface. When my head finally emerged, I swallowed desperately, my lungs expanding painfully. I looked around, disoriented. I had been dragged away from where I fell, but by some miracle I was close to the shore. With the last strength I had left, I swam to the river's edge and dragged myself out of the water. As soon as I felt solid ground beneath my body, I collapsed. I was exhausted, shaking from the cold and shock. But she was alive and transformed by the experience I had just had. I heard screams in the distance, and lifting my head with effort, I saw figures running towards me. I recognized Harper, the rafting guide, and my heart jumped. Ethan. My son ran ahead of everyone, his face a mixture of fear and relief. When Ethan reached me, he dropped to the ground next to me, hugging me with all the strength his small body possessed. I felt your hot tears against my cold skin, heard your broken sobs. "Mom," he repeated. "Mom, you're okay. You're alive." I hugged him back, ignoring the pain in my muscles. At that moment, all that mattered was that I was back, that I could hold my son again. The memories of paradise were still vivid in my mind, but the love I felt for Ethan was so strong, so real, that it anchored me firmly back to Earth. Harper arrived soon after, crying and laughing at the same time. She wrapped me in a hug, babbling about how terrified she had been, how desperately they had been searching for me downriver. The guide arrived soon after, already talking about calling an ambulance and taking me to the hospital. I wanted to tell them what had happened, tell them about my encounter with God, about paradise, about the message I had received. But when I opened my mouth to speak, all that came out was a harsh cough. My throat was raw from the water I had swallowed. As they carried me away from the river toward the arriving ambulance, I kept Ethan close to me. He refused to let go of my hand, as if he feared I might disappear again if he let go. On the way to the hospital, lying on the ambulance stretcher with Ethan by my side, I began to process everything that had happened. The fall into the river, the drowning, the encounter with God, paradise, the message about the future. It was too much to absorb at once. But I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. I had died and come back. I had seen beyond the veil that separates our world from the next. And now, I had a mission. A message to share, a future to prepare for. I looked at Ethan, his worried little face watching my every move, and smiled. We were back together, and I had been blessed with a second chance. A chance to be a better mother, to live a fuller and more meaningful life. As the ambulance raced through the streets, I silently thanked God for the opportunity to return, and I promised myself I wouldn't waste this gift. The days following my rescue were a whirlwind of medical exams, visits from concerned friends, and moments of quiet reflection. The hospital became my temporary home while doctors monitored my recovery. Physically, I was exhausted. My lungs ached with every breath, a constant reminder of the water that had almost completely filled them. My muscles were sore from the effort of fighting the current. But these physical pains seemed insignificant compared to the internal transformation I was experiencing. Ethan rarely left my side. He slept in a chair next to my bed, refusing to go home even when Harper offered to take care of him. His presence was a comfort, a constant reminder of why I had chosen to return. In the quiet moments of the night, when Ethan finally fell asleep and the hospital fell silent, I allowed myself to relive my experience. I closed my eyes and I could almost feel the heavenly light surrounding me again, hear the voice of God resounding in my soul. The peace I had felt in paradise seemed so distant now, but the memory of it soothed me. The doctors were perplexed by my quick recovery. They talked about medical miracles and incredible luck. I smiled and nodded, knowing I couldn't explain the real reason for my survival. How could I put into words what I had experienced? How could I describe the indescribable? Harper visited me daily, bringing news from the outside world and apologizing repeatedly for the accident. I assured her that there was nothing to be sorry for, that things had gone exactly as they should. It was during one of these visits that I was finally able to talk about my experience. Harper listened silently, her eyes widening as I described my encounter with God and vision of paradise. When I mentioned the message about the future, about September 11th, 2024, she took my hand, her eyes filling with tears. "I believe you, Rowan," she said simply. Those words meant more to me than she could have imagined. Having someone believe in me, accept my experience without question, was an immense relief. As the days passed and my strength returned, I began to think about the future. What would I do with the knowledge I had received? How could I prepare people for the global spiritual awakening that was coming? These questions occupied my thoughts constantly. Ethan, with his childish curiosity, asked questions about where I had been, what I had seen. I responded as best I could, adapting my experience so that a 9-year-old could understand. He talked about God's love, about how each person is precious and has a purpose. He listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word. Finally, after a week in the hospital, the doctors released me. Leaving the hospital was like emerging from a cocoon. The world seemed different now, more vibrant, more alive. Every color seemed more intense, every sound clearer. It was as if my senses had been heightened, sharpened to perceive the beauty and miracle of life that I had previously taken for granted. As Ethan and I walked out of the hospital hand in hand, I knew we were starting a new chapter in our lives. It wouldn't be easy. I still had a lot of questions, a lot of things to process, but I also had a new perspective, a new understanding of God's love and the purpose of life. I looked up at the blue sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, and smiled. I was alive, I was with my son, and I had a mission to accomplish. The future, with all its challenges and possibilities, awaited me. Returning home was a surreal experience. Every familiar detail, the creak of the front door, the lavender scent of the sachet I always kept in the entryway, even the lingering stain on the living room rug, felt new and precious. It was as if I was seeing my home for the first time, with eyes newly opened to the beauty of everyday life. Ethan ran ahead of me, eager to show me how he and Harper had kept everything in order during my absence. He had even made a welcome banner, hanging crookedly over the fireplace with the words, "Welcome back, Mom," written in colorful and uneven letters. The sight of that banner, so simple and full of love, made me choke up with emotion. The first few days at home were a period of adjustment. My body was still recovering, and I tired easily. But more than physical fatigue, it was the mental and emotional readaptation that presented the biggest challenge. Everything in my life was now seen through the lens of my near-death experience. The worries that once consumed me, overdue bills, problems at work, small disagreements, now seemed insignificant. I had glimpsed eternity. I had experienced God's unconditional love. How could I care about these earthly things in the same way? At the same time, I struggled to integrate my spiritual experience with the mundane reality of everyday life. How could I live in the normal world carrying the knowledge I now possessed? How could I explain to others what had happened to me without seeming crazy? Ethan, in his childlike innocence, seemed to accept my transformation with an ease that surprised me. He asked questions about the bright place I had been, about what God was like, about the angels I had seen. I responded as best I could, marveling at his ability to accept the extraordinary. One night, as I was putting him to bed, Ethan asked me a question that took me by surprise. "Mom," he said, his eyes wide and serious in the dark, "do you think I can see God one day too?" I was silent for a moment, thinking carefully about how to respond. "Ethan," I began, "God is always with us, even when we can't see him. What happened to me was very special, but you don't have to go through what I went through to be close to God. He loves you, just like you do. And..." Ethan seemed to ponder this for a moment, then smiled and snuggled into his blankets. "Good night, Mom," he murmured, already half asleep. I kissed her forehead and silently left the room, my heart overflowing with love. In the days that followed, I began to think seriously about what to do with the knowledge I had received. The message about September 11th, 2024 weighed on my mind. How could I prepare people for this global spiritual awakening? How could I share what I had learned without sounding like a lunatic? I decided to start slowly. I started attending a support group for people who have had near-death experiences. There, for the first time, I met people who truly understood what I had been through. Hearing their stories, sharing mine, was incredibly therapeutic. At work, I noticed that I was more patient, more understanding with my colleagues and clients. The perspective I had gained allowed me to see beyond the small irritations of everyday life to the humanity and struggles of each person. Little by little, I began sharing parts of my experience with close friends and family. Some reacted with skepticism, others with fascination. Harper, true to her word, remained my biggest supporter, always willing to listen when I needed to vent. One significant change was my approach to spirituality. Although she had never been particularly religious before, she now felt a deep connection to the divine. I began meditating regularly, trying to recapture that sense of peace and love I had experienced in paradise. I also began reading voraciously about spirituality, philosophy, and near-death experiences. I wanted to better understand what had happened to me, to contextualize my experience. The more I read, the more I realized that my experience, although unique to me, was part of a larger pattern of similar experiences reported by people around the world. As the months passed, I felt like I was slowly integrating my experience into my everyday life. It wasn't easy. There were days when mundane reality felt oppressive, when I longed for the peace and clarity I had experienced in the afterlife. But whenever I felt that way, I looked at Ethan and remembered why I chose to come back. One night, about 6 months after my accident, I was sitting on the porch at home, looking at the stars. Ethan was already in bed, and the neighborhood was quiet. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost feel that divine light surrounding me again. I opened my eyes and looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter than ever, each a reminder of the vastness and beauty of the universe. I thought about the message I had received, the date that was still years in the future. At that moment, I had an epiphany. My mission was not to convince the entire world about what was coming. My mission was to live each day with love, compassion, and awareness. It was about creating waves of positivity in my little corner of the world that would eventually spread and touch other lives. With this realization, I felt peace settle in my heart. I didn't know exactly what the future held, but I knew I was on the right path. With God by my side and Ethan as my anchor, I was ready to face whatever came my way. The years following my near-death experience were a journey of personal and spiritual growth. As I approached the revealed date, September 11, 2024, I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I kept my job and continued raising Ethan the best I could, but my perspective on life had fundamentally changed. I began to see every interaction, every moment, as an opportunity to spread love and understanding. Ethan, now a teenager, was growing with wisdom beyond his years. He had absorbed much of what I had shared about my experience and had developed his own unique spirituality. Sometimes I caught him meditating alone in his room or asking deep questions about the meaning of life. His growth filled me with pride and constantly reminded me of what a miracle it was to be alive to witness it. I continued participating in the support group for people with near-death experiences, and over time, I was invited to share my story at smaller events. At first, I was nervous to speak publicly about something so personal and potentially controversial, but I soon realized that many people were hungry for hope and a deeper connection with the divine. I began keeping a journal, documenting not only my thoughts and feelings, but also the little coincidences and moments of synchronicity that seemed more and more frequent in my life. I noticed patterns emerging as if the universe was conspiring to guide me in a specific direction. As the date approached, I noticed subtle changes in the world around me. More people seemed to be awakening to spiritual and existential questions. There was an increase in interest in meditative practices, yoga, and other forms of spiritual pursuits. The news spoke of a growing global awareness movement, with people from different backgrounds coming together to address issues such as climate change, social inequality, and global conflicts. Of course, not everything was positive. There was also an increase in political polarization, intensified conflicts in various parts of the world, and a general sense of uncertainty about the future. But even in the midst of these difficulties, I could feel an undercurrent of change, a collective awakening that was slowly gaining momentum. In 2023, I decided to organize a small study group in my home. It wasn't anything grand, just a handful of people interested in discussing spirituality, consciousness, and the potential for global change. I didn't specifically mention the date that was revealed to me, but I shared my belief that we were on the cusp of a great transformation. These gatherings became a beacon of hope and community. People of different backgrounds and beliefs came together to discuss, meditate, and support each other. Seeing the positive impact this small group was having on our local community gave me hope that, indeed, greater change was coming. Ethan, now 16, sometimes joined our meetings. His youthful perspective and innovative ideas often brought new insights to our discussions. He spoke passionately about how his generation was determined to make positive changes in the world, and I saw in him the potential for a better future. As we approached September 2024, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. I didn't know exactly what to expect, whether there would be some dramatic event or whether the change would be more subtle, but I was determined to be prepared, whatever came. I intensified my spiritual practice, meditating longer each day and actively seeking ways to be an agent of positive change in my community. I started volunteering at a local shelter, offering emotional support to people going through difficult times. On a quiet evening a few weeks before the date, I sat with Ethan on our porch. Looking up at the stars, I shared with him my hopes and fears about the future. "Mom," he said, his voice calm and confident, "no matter what happens, we will be together. And if what you saw is true, then we have an important role to play. We are ready." Your words filled me with a deep peace. Yes, we were ready. Whatever change was coming, we would face it together, with love, courage, and hope. Now we are just days away from September 11th, 2024. The date that was revealed to me so many years ago is about to arrive, and I confess that my heart is full of conflicting emotions. There's a part of me that's anxious, almost electric with anticipation. After all these years of preparation, of personal and spiritual growth, of sharing my story and helping others awaken to their own spiritual journeys, it feels like we are on the cusp of something truly monumental. Another part of me is nervous. What if nothing happens? What if the day comes and passes like any other? Or worse, what if something negative occurs? These doubts occasionally arise, but I try not to dwell on them. I remember the love and peace I felt in God's presence, and it reassures me. Ethan, now 17, has been my rock during this waiting period. Your unwavering faith and balanced perspective keep me grounded when my mind starts to wander. He constantly reminds me that regardless of what happens on a specific date, the work we've done, the love we spread, the lives we touch, has value in and of itself. Our small study group has grown over the years, and now includes people from all over the city and even neighboring towns. We decided to organize a meditation retreat for September 11th. I haven't publicly announced what the date means to me, but many in the group feel something important is about to happen. The world around us seems to be in a state of flux. The news tells of astonishing scientific advances, of peace movements gaining strength in areas of long-standing conflict, of a growing global awareness of the interconnectedness of all beings. At the same time, there are reports of natural disasters, political tensions, and economic crises. It's as if the world is at a turning point, poised between chaos and transformation. Last night, sitting on my usual porch, looking up at the stars as I have done so many times since my experience, I reflected on everything that has happened over the past 16 years. The journey was not easy. There were moments of deep doubt, moments when I wondered if I had imagined it all, if I was crazy for basing my life on a vision I had during a traumatic experience. But then I remember the feeling of being in the presence of God, the unconditional love I experienced, the peace I felt in paradise. These memories are so vivid, so real, that I can't deny them. They gave me strength in the most difficult moments. They guided me when I felt lost. As I watch the night sky, I feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for having had the chance to watch Ethan grow, for every moment of joy and sadness I have experienced since then. Every breath is a gift, every day an opportunity to spread more love and light in the world. I don't know exactly what September 11th, 2024 will bring. Perhaps it will be a dramatic event that changes the course of human history. Perhaps it is something more subtle, the beginning of a shift in consciousness that will unfold over years or decades. Or maybe it's just another day, seemingly ordinary, but full of potential like all the others. Whatever happens, I am at peace. I know I did the best I could to prepare myself and to help others prepare. I lived each day with the awareness of the preciousness of life and of God's love for all of us. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, will be another day of possibilities. I will wake up, hug my son, and face whatever comes with an open heart and a clear mind. Because in the end, that's what my near-death experience taught me. Every moment is an opportunity for love, for growth, for connection with the divine. And as the stars shine above me, I feel a rush of hope and expectation. Whatever the future brings, we are ready. We are awake. We are united. And together, we can create a more loving, more compassionate, and more conscious world. Tomorrow is coming, and with it perhaps the beginning of a new era for humanity. I am grateful to be here to witness, to participate, to love. May the love I felt in paradise spread across the earth, bringing light to every dark corner, hope to every broken heart, and peace to a world in need of healing. The future awaits us, and I'm ready to embrace it with open arms.